Well, I spoke to Joshua Williams via Zoom recently. He's president of the Fashion Consort and assistant professor at the Parsons School of Design. And he began by explaining some of the key ways that 2020 changed the fashion industry.
You know, what's really interesting is I think we're seeing acceleration happening on all of the things that businesses were planning as part of maybe their 5 or 10 year plans. All of a sudden, those got accelerated very, very quickly. Things like technology implementation, coordinating online services, more personalized services, all of those types of things, again, that were set for the next 3 to 5 years had to happen almost immediately.
And as you know, obviously, there are a lot of different moving parts in the fashion industry, from the manufacturers to the designers to the retailers and workers throughout the supply chain. Which sectors would you say have fared the best and the worst?
It's a great question. I think that marketing were able to adapt quickly because they essentially were able to use the tools of social media and other sort of media formats to be able to engage their customers in different ways. For those, especially at the beginning where they were relying on supply chain and getting those goods to America or to Europe from China, for example, it was very difficult because first it was tied up in China, and then all of a sudden things got worse in America, and so we had goods but nobody to buy them. So a lot of that has worked itself out over the course of the past 8 to 9 months. But retailers, of course, are really looking to this final quarter to try to make up a lot of the lost time that they've had.
So, given some of that lost time, then, what are your expectations for the industry in 2021?
Well, first of all, I think this acceleration of change around technology and just thinking about how we service the customer has forced brands to essentially upgrade quicker than they thought and to really rethink even their force, their human resources, and thinking about who they actually need in very strategic positions. So I think we're going to go into 2021 a lot more leaner and a lot more agile. And of course, that means that there were people that lost their jobs and things along the way. But I think that companies have had to trim the fat, so to speak, and are really having to think, how can we be very strategic?
So, are there any particular countries or demographics that you think the industry is really going to be targeting?
Well, there's this whole new target audience of the worker who wants more comfortable clothing. So a lot of fashion brands on the luxury side, even, we're seeing a lot more elastic waists. We're seeing a lot more sort of looser clothing. So I think everyone's sort of been pivoting there. We're also seeing a lot of people rethinking masks as potentially an accessory and not just as something that one has to wear, and really thinking about the fashion brand's role in terms of health, our social health, and how we can play a role in that. So I think companies sort of existed on the outskirts of those social questions, and now they're very much in the middle of those conversations.
Now, it's interesting because we did see the luxury sector starting to bounce back a little bit, especially in China, as they started to reopen up. What are your expectations, not just for luxury, but for some of these other trends that you might see?
Well, I do think that while we do want comfort, I think once we're able to get out and about, and we're already seeing in this in China, is we want something that's special, that gets us out of this sort of quarantine life that we've been living. And so people are spending on unique things. They're spending on very personalized things. In some cases, that means luxuries. In other cases, it just means maybe finally buying something very unique and special that's sort of your own. I do think that a lot of brands are realizing that they are going to have to be more personalized in how they interact with customers. They can't just look at China, for example, as one big market. It's made up of so many different cities, so many different cultures, as just as America is, just as Europe is. And I think gone are the days of the sort of global standard where we all sort of go along with the same trend.
And I will say 2020 was certainly a year where people were definitely more culturally aware. Obviously, you had the
Yes.
protests, you had a lot of geopolitical issues between countries. And we did see that Nike reportedly lobbied the US government to weaken its Uyghur bill. So using that as an example, are there any other stress points that you see going into 2021?
Well, I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg in terms of how things play out politically. I always say that the politics has a lot to do with fashion trends in terms of all of the negotiations that happen around travel, which affects the tariffs, the duties, and the prices that we pay on goods. Currently we do have an ongoing battle between France and the US around luxury goods that's going to have an ongoing effect, even as we have a new Biden presidency. So I think that brands realize that they can't just say, okay, the next 4 years will be X, Y, and Z. They're realizing that what happens in China matters, what happens in India matters, what happens in France is different than what happens in Italy. We're still watching Brexit, obviously. So all of these things are very localized in many ways, but they have a great effect on the global economy, and especially how fashion is moved, both in terms of trend, but also in terms of our shopping habits.